So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay. My word, has it been a tiring few days between graduation, induction and work stuff, but finally I'm going to try and get back into some sort of semblance of a schedule with Third Age Reforged. I had managed to build up enough of a sort of recorded backlog that I could sort of go through that period without needing to do anything extra. But now, of course, I'm going to try and get into things a little bit more. So, obviously, like I said, it's going to be a little bit harder going now that university has basically started up again. So, do bear with me, but I'm still going to be putting out regular content where, you know, as much as I possibly can. And there will be at least 2 videos a week, I'm hoping, so it's not too much of a disruption, as I said. But I'm going to ease back into things after this very hectic few days with a battle on the North Downs. And the North Downs is a very interesting map. It's got a lot of terrain features on it. There are trees. There's a lot going for it, to be honest with you. There are more open areas as well for cavalry, and it'll be interesting to see how the factions that are involved today actually handle things. Because for the red team, the theme of this battle is going to be that the Númenóreans have reunited, because we have Númenor and Umbar facing off against their foes, which are going to be a very odd alliance of Angmar and Mirkwood, to be honest with you. But, you know, the Númenóreans getting a bit uppity. I can't really see any situation in which the elves would willingly fight alongside the orcs, but that is the situation that is laid out before us. And speaking of which, Lister is the player who sent me the battle replay, and he is going to be playing as Angmar. He plays as Angmar a lot, so it's certainly his favourite faction, I would not hesitate to guess. And there's a lot to admire about Angmar, to be honest with you. They're relatively straightforward to play, and also they're very effective at what they do. I wouldn't necessarily say that they're easy, because that might elicit the wrong type of reaction. But I think Angmar, most of the fun comes from 9 times out of 10. Obviously, it's going to come down to you charging forward and trying to crush your opponent beneath your sheer strength. But, part of the fun is sort of coming up with new ways with which to do that, especially considering tailoring your army to face the opponent that's across from you is also quite important. And in this case, Númenor and Umbar have got certainly the infantry that can withstand a big Angmar push, so they may have to be a little bit more careful here and rely on some of their specialty units like their Barrow Wights. Their Barrow Wights can be very, very difficult to cut through on the front line, even for the high damage infantry that Umbar and Númenor are renowned for. The Barrow Wights will be able to keep the Angmar front line together for a long time just through sheer survivability. The glue that will hold some of the lesser units of Angmar together, perhaps. Just in behind there is also a makeshift skirmish line from Angmar. Archers are obviously not something Angmar are particularly good at, but they can still field some cheap ones, which may very well drain some resources from both Númenor and Umbar, who both have some very nasty skirmishers at long range, Umbar in particular, I must say. So Goblin Trackers and Snaga Archers are here hiding in the trees, but they will undoubtedly move forward to draw some fire away from their more important units, which are of course made up in their infantry line. We have the rusted armour of the Witch-Realm Pikemen, which, if they can avoid all the skirmishers from the Númenorian factions and they get into position, they will be a very good anchor for the Angmar push. We'll see how they go though, because obviously both Númenor and Umbar do have pikes of their own, but particularly in Umbar's case, and Númenor, I guess, the Naruna Aru Sentinels are better, but you can only have one. The Balabgaya Pikemen are not as good as the Witch-Realm Pikemen, so perhaps here pikes are where they can sort of lay down a bit of an advantage regardless of who they're facing off against. We also have some Angmar Halberds here. Of course, the AP will be useful against both, again though, provided they can get into a melee fight without getting shredded by the enemy skirmishers, which is of course a very real worry, especially for the Halberds, to be honest, because at least the Witch-Realm Pikes do have that heavy plate armour that they wear, rusted as it may be. The Halberds do not have that luxury, so they will get torn apart by even the most basic archers. We have the Guardians of Kharn Dûm, once again with the rusted armour, big shields as well, so skirmish fire is not going to be so much of an issue for them unless it's very high-end skirmishers or rangers, for example. But they will make a very good survivable core to the front line as line infantry. But both Númenor and Umbar have actually got better line infantry than the Guardians of Kharn Dûm, so usually Angmar can actually count on a bit of an advantage with their Guardians, but not this time, I fear. We have some Warg Riders and some Witch-Realm Inquisitors, which of course another thing that Angmar can bring to bear is a lot of anti-cavalry capabilities on horseback, particularly of course from their Witch-Realm Inquisitors. This is something that both Umbar, though in lesser numbers, can do, and Númenor can do in slightly greater numbers though, so again this is an area in which Angmar can usually count on a significant advantage. Today they're going to have to work for a cavalry advantage, so we'll see how well that goes. Snaga Stalks of course free for the first unit, so you may as well bring one hiding over there. In the backfield, again, we have sort of a symmetrical line here. We have the Witch-Realm Hammer Guard, which is where the general's going to be. So, usually we see the Black Guard, so it's actually quite nice to see the Hammer Guard for once. The Hammer Guard, of course, with a huge AP bonus, so again, they're going for slightly more damage here, which will be useful against both of their foes, and that's where the General is, of course. We have the attack-focused Trolls of Angmar with their 2 shards of metal affixed to their arms. Of course, Trolls, they're going to be good for sort of smashing their way through lines, but of course they do need to be supported. Angmar usually don't have trouble supporting their Trolls, however, so that should be just fine. We have some Warg Riders over here as well on this flank. Now we shall move on to Mirkwood. Mirkwood have got a pretty mean rush on them as well, if you really invest heavily in that, but based on the fact that they do have some Horse Archers here from Mango Masher, I would imagine he's probably not going to go all out, especially seeing as Umbar have deployed in such a way where he can't really rush anymore because they're so far away. He's going to have to sort of link up with his ally. The Bows of Emondwyr, however, are a very good Horse Archer at dealing damage, not so good at taking damage, it must be said. Relatively light armour, you know, they're quite expensive as well, so if they start to die off to cheaper archers, it can be a real problem from a cost efficiency standpoint, but the damage they can do is undoubted. We have some Hiri Lang, obviously some heavy Elven Swordsmen, very, very nice at dealing damage. Some Hiri Auth, there's no armour upgrades on these lads, so you know they're not boosted up to the extent that some of the Mirkwood infantry can be. But they still have their shields, so they should be just fine, and obviously in melee, the Elven units will be able to really put some pressure on the Númenóreans. Blades of Emondwyr, slightly cheaper, but of course it does allow for slightly more numbers, more Hiri Auth, more Blades of Emondwyr, and on the other side we also have some Spears of Emondwyr. Is that? Yeah, we'll get onto them in a minute, I think. We have some Ents as well, obviously, again, behaving very much like Trolls, so alongside the Trolls of Angmar there are going to be some real spikes of damage. I think the Ents are even tougher to bring down, though, than the Trolls of Angmar, but still, it's still going to be the same sort of strengths and weaknesses going on there. The Elders of the Elven King with their Silverthorn arrows, their high mass arrows that will knock people over, very, very useful. More useful, to be honest, if the enemy is advancing into you rather than the other way around, but you can still really disrupt them. So we'll see how that plays out, I think, from a Mirkwood perspective. Some Hiri Pang at the back, so the slightly more heavily armoured Mirkwood archers. Obviously very high damage as well, and good in melee, as most heavy Elven archers tend to be. Some Elder Council, so some Javelins. Javelins are very important, you know, in 0.97, just for dealing with certain targets. The damage that they offer quickly is very useful, and of course the Elder Council also spears in melee. And then, probably my favourite Mirkwood unit after how well they tend to perform is the Sindar of the Girdle. I think they're actually getting a few changes in the hotfix to sort of... It's not really a nerf as such, it's more of a sort of shift in their responsibilities. They're going to be made technically even more damaging at a cost of some of their utility, I think. That would be the best way to put it. I'm not going to sort of say outright what I think is going to happen, because I might be wrong. But the Sindar of the Girdle, I think, are being changed a little bit. It should make them more damaging, though, based on what I know. And the Sindar of the Girdle are already incredibly difficult to face directly, but of course, like most Mirkwood units, lighter armour than some other elves, and so as soon as their hit points are gone, any sort of projectile is going to be a real problem for them. So you do need to use them sparingly, because if you send them into a death trap, they may not last as long as you would hope. Then, the first Númenórean army, played by Deathy, so we have Umbar. He has got some Balagai units, some Balagai footmen. He's got the Alcarondas Legion, which of course in this sort of situation where all of the armies on the field really are going to come down to, I think, more of a quality focus, even Angmar. So it's unsurprising to see the Alcarondas Legion here in force with the Naru Sentinels at their centre. So again, that's sort of the highest quality Umbar front line that you're likely to see, with some Balagai footmen on the sides to prevent any sort of cavalry flanking. Harbingers of Castamere are also right here in the middle, so that's another very, very high quality unit that Umbar have got in here, so one of the better heavy swordsmen in the game. Balaketh Marksmen are also here in force, so they make for pretty decent makeshift line infantry when they are out of ammunition. However, the main attraction for them, of course, is their effectiveness in a skirmish fight. So their heavy armour and their shields, albeit they don't have the armour upgrade here, but their shields will do most of the heavy lifting there, to be honest with you. Very good at trading fire with other archers. As are the Naru Royal Guard, so another morale buffing unit. And then both units of knights. This is where most of Umbar's money has gone into, actually, because you can see that most of their infantry force is relatively small. I don't think they've even got crossbow corsairs or Castamere's Rangers, which usually you'll see at least one of those because of their damage. Not even any Corsair Blackguards, so they've gone for pretty much none of their high damage skirmishers. I think, anyway, they could be like a unit tucked away around here somewhere, because most of them can hide. But they've gone for both units of knights, which is a big investment, but it also gives them a lot of strength on horseback. So the Warlords, the Lancers, obviously better at dealing damage to infantry charging in, and then the Alcarondas Faithful, which are the melee knights, better at being in melee with other cavalry. So big investment there, but potentially a good one, because it does look as though they're going to set their infantry up in a defensive position on a hill, which means they can use their cavalry in more offensive ways, and they won't they aren't in danger of being overwhelmed if they get into a nice defensive position. Speaking of which, Agalar Galudithon, he has got some Balagar archers on the front line playing as Numenor, of course. Remena Nardukadar with their armour piercing, very, very useful, of course, against the Orcs of Angmar, but maybe not so much against Mirkwood. Good to see some Javelins, at least. They may not have the Corsair Blackguards, but they do have the Seafarers and Nindamels, which honestly are my favourite Numenor unit. They don't have a lot of ammo, but the damage they can do, they can rip a hole, basically, in the enemy army with the limited ammunition they have. And then they're pretty decent makeshift line infantry as well, so they can do all that damage, and then they can be a workhorse on the front line. I mean, what more could you want? They're not even that expensive, to be honest with you, in comparison to a lot of Numenor's other stuff. Nara and Iru Sentinels, again, nice centre to the army, another morale buffing unit. It's unlikely, to be honest with you, that the Numenorians are going to be the ones routing in this fight, purely because of all the morale buffing units they seem to have brought. Remena Boabarim, again, not a lot of ammunition, but armour-piercing arrows, very, very useful. They can definitely take their pick of the targets that Angmar have to offer as they move forward. Remena Abarim, they actually have less defensive stats than the Castamirs, not the Castamirs, the Alcarondas Legion, I should say. But they do have better attack stats. Their base attack is very high. It's actually on the same level, I think, as some heavy swordsman units. So it really does sort of it really does state quite plainly, what their focus is. They are going to be doing a lot of damage on the front line. If Angmar do not engage them properly, they will find their infantry getting torn to shreds pretty quickly. We have the Royal Legion of Armenelos with their increased unit size. This is one of the reasons why I would actually bring these guys a lot more. They really do overshadow units like the Wardens of the White Tower and perhaps even the Witch-Round Blackguard, you could say, just because of their increased numbers. In terms of quality, this puts them perhaps more on the level of some of the Dwarven infantry units of this type, which is high praise indeed. They also look very fantastic as well. We have some Karibarim, so some Spear Cav on that side, and some Pharazim Nobles, so I'm just going to call them melee knights. There is, again, there is a distinction in that the Pharazim Nobles are not quite as strong as the Witch-Realm Inquisitors or the Haven Knights in melee with other cavalry, but they do have a better charge. But for all intents and purposes, you're going to be using them in much the same way as the Witch-Realm Inquisitors. It's just that when time comes to start charging into infantry, they'll be slightly better. When the time comes for engaging with other cavalry, they'll be ever so slightly worse. But yeah, that's really by the by. But without further ado, let's begin. So I will be interested actually to see how the blue team decides to engage in this one, because it is quite a difficult situation that they're in already, I would say, because they are going to have to deal with the fact that Umbar are almost certainly going to be heading up onto the hill to pitch their tent alongside their buddies in Numenor. And with all of their defensive skirmishes, I must say, it's going to be a very difficult task to pry them off that, and if they just charge forward unthinkingly, the Numenorian cavalry is really going to come for them. So you can see there is now movement as Mirkwood starts setting off. I mean, it will be interesting actually to see, because there is an opportunity here very early on to potentially do some harassment damage to Umbar. There we can see some high damage skirmishes popping in. Both units of Corsair Crossbowmen, so yeah. The Blackguard and the Rangers, though, being the omissions here, which is maybe a little bit more understandable. You can see the Knights also moving off, so Umbar are going to have to be careful as they move forward here, not to get harassed too much by Mirkwood, but I don't feel as though Mirkwood are going to be able to close the distance, and more to the point, they might not want to, because of course Mirkwood, if they get into range of any of the Umbar skirmishers, a lot of their units are very lightly armoured and unshielded, especially the mounted units. They're not horses, they're elk. But still, you can actually see here as well, Umbar are actually not going to pitch their tent as much as I fear. I was going to say that would definitely have coloured my perception of who to support in this fight. But they are still going to be right alongside their ally, and still, Numenor are well within their rights to utilise this hill as well, I would say, because it is in their deployment zone. And ultimately, Angmar is under no obligation to advance into them, but the same is true the other way around. It's always possible in this sort of situation that the battle is mainly going to be decided off on this flank, the Umbar-Mirkwood side of things. Mirkwood getting their cavalry into a threatening position, and honestly, when it comes to situations like this, cavalry can perform a role just by threatening to charge in, because it forces resources to be siphoned off, which could be utilised on the front line. Of course, with Umbar investing so much in their cavalry, their front line is obviously going to have less numbers on it. They still have a lot of quality here. Balaketh units, Outgrondas Legion, their pikes, Harbingers. They have 2 units of Balagar footmen, which are really the only standard units they have on the front line. So it does go to show that Umbar have gone for a very quality heavy army, but that of course means less numbers. So we'll see if that pans out for them. Barrow Whites are sort of shifting over. I think I will make a little bit of a cut actually, because it looks as though that they're just going to be sort of dancing around one another for the time being, linking up with one another and then choosing where and when to move. Although actually, perhaps not. Perhaps the Romena Cariberim are going to move in. The Barrow Whites are in their sights, and the Cariberim, they may not have the same sort of charge as Lances of a similar cost, but it's still very solid. But in the end, they think better of it as the Snaga. Honestly, I probably would have carried through on that charge. Like, the Snaga archers are not that impressive. Perhaps it was more the cavalry that worried them. A couple of kills there from the Snaga archers, but then that's mainly because the Cariberim were showing their backs to the arrows. I suppose this is fairly worrying if you were there, but it's Barrow Whites. It was a good opportunity to maybe take a chunk out of them there. It would have been risky, of course, because it would have absolutely not been worth it if they got caught by all that Angmar cavalry, but I think they probably could have got in and out there, especially if they charged off in that direction afterwards. But that opportunity is well and truly gone now. Angmar will be wise to frontal cavalry charges from now on. And time will tell how both sides want to handle this. Woodland Round Patrol revealing themselves from Mirkwood as well, the basic, in inverted commas, archer that Mirkwood can field. Obviously very high damage, not necessarily the best in a skirmish fight, but the damage here might be just what they need. Drain some of the ammo with the lower tier archers of Angmar and then come in with the higher damage. So yeah, it is definitely a sort of manoeuvring, dancing around one another, sort of getting into a position, and then the engagements will happen as and when they do. The cavalry is just sort of marshalling one another's presence here on the front, keeping one another in check. It's unfortunate for Mirkwood, I think, that there's a sort of natural choke point that Umbar can take advantage of here, and their cavalry kind of has to funnel into it. They could go right the way around, but it's so far that obviously it's going to be easy to see that coming. Now though, Umbar, or Numenor I should say, the Numenorians, Balagar archers coming forward, obviously not necessarily the best armor values, but the little bucklers more than make up for that actually, and makes them a very, very good archer to skirmish back and forth with. Be interested to see actually what they're going after. Yeah, they're going after, I believe, the Woodland Round Patrol, which would be a good target, but of course they can hide, so there's a limit to how long they're going to be able to skirmish with them. There's really no point in using basic archers like the Balagar archers to try and shoot Barrow Whites with. It may seem like a good idea to try and peel away their hit points, but you won't get any kills, you won't do much damage, and arrows are ultimately much better off and much better served going after units which they're going to be able to do more damage to in a direct fashion. Here come the Alcarondas Faithful. Warlords of Umbar also being siphoned off, so more and more actually, less resources being committed over here, so if they bide their time, Mirkwood could be able to use their cavalry and the Sindar of the Girdle. From personal experience, I can tell you they are very, very solid indeed. But I can understand here why Angmar is being a little bit more cautious than perhaps we're used to seeing Angmar be, because Numenor are in a exceptionally intimidating position, and with all their skirmishes as well, going forward with everything, the Romena Boabrim will be able to tee off into all of Angmar's best units, leaving their lower tier units all isolated for the Seafarers and the Abarim, and the other Romena units like the Nardukadar to just tear to pieces. So the pace of this fight early, I imagine, is going to be relatively static, but as both sides start to run out of arrows, in particular here, these Balagar archers have gotten far too isolated, I think, and immediately Angmar's 2 units of archers are going to be able to overwhelm the Balagar archers, and they're actually falling at an extent where I think maybe... No, it is. It's just the Angmar skirmishers. They're just so close, and the numbers are so overwhelming. The Balagar archers are being cut down, so this is another nice little mini victory, I would say, for the blue team, if they can continue to chip away at the skirmish lines of the de facto defenders in many ways, based on the position of the map. But yeah, I would say certainly if the red team cannot leverage all of their skirmishes and their position to good effect, they could be in a lot of trouble. But here, I thought Angmar would be wise to this, but the Romena Cariberim do manage to get a pretty nice charge into the Barrow Whites. However, of course, this does mean that all of these skirmishes are immediately going to shift their attention. 2 units of Snaga archers, in fact, there is, and 1 unit of Goblin Trackers, so a lot of Angmar archers today. The Barrow Whites do take a few losses, but they were in loose, so they did manage to mitigate a lot of that charge damage, and the Cariberim ultimately probably took more losses there than you would like. Yeah, and if you're going to do a lot of damage to Barrow Wights in that fashion, they probably thought, actually, based on this, that they probably thought they could get a just frontal charge into the Snaga archers because the Barrow Wights were hiding. So the Barrow Wights doing their thing and acting as a meat shield, the sacrificial lamb. The tar pit on the front line of Angmar, guarding some of the weaker units there. Very, very nice, and obviously that was certainly a fight which, again, the blue team had the best of, but again, these are not really terrible losses that the red team are suffering so far, purely because the red team will win and lose this fight based on how well their higher tier skirmishers do and based on how much work they can make their defensive position do for them. The Warlords of Umbar are actually losing a unit model there under a full volley there from the lower tier archers of Angmar, who are really actually doing a very good job. Lower tier archers like this in .97 are, if they get involved in a one-on-one skirmish fight with an archer that's better than them, they will get ripped to pieces. But Angmar are really leveraging their superior numbers here to very good effect. And now we can see the Sindar of the Girdle are moving forward, and these Balagire archers are probably not going to be able to escape, I wouldn't have thought. Albeit the Sindar of the Girdle wisely not charging into them fully, because the Boabarim are right there, and of course with their damage they'd be able to worry the Sindar of the Girdle quite a lot. In fact, there are more arrows coming in. Balaketh marksman over there in the distance. Neither side too eager at this point to fully commit. The Balagire archers doing some damage here to the Angmar cavalry, although is that one of the Witcher Arm Inquisitors there? It is. There is an Inquisitor's corpse, but it's mostly Wart, as you would expect. You know, they're obviously a much riper target for archers like the Balagire archers as soon as their hit points are gone. Wargs, of course, are very, very weak defensively. Much like Berserkers, they are entirely reliant on their hit points, really, from a defensive standpoint. The Boabarim have moved forward, though, so I mean, to give Numenor some credit, they're being a little bit more aggressive than I expected them to be, but I mean, if you're going to commit to a more defensive strategy, you should maybe think about sticking to it, because I don't think moving the Boabarim forward this early was a particularly good idea. They were maybe going after the trolls, but even then I would be less inclined, actually, to go after trolls, even with armor-piercing archers. I would probably want to go after the higher tier infantry more so than the trolls. Trolls, I feel like the best way to deal with them is just to bog them down in decent quality infantry, to be honest, and or charge them with cavalry. Arrows, even armor-piercing ones, because of the low unit count and how spread out trolls can be, I've rarely seen that work. The Barrow Wights now are shambling forwards, potentially to put some more pressure onto the Balagire archers, or maybe even to force some of the other archer units from Umbar and Numenor to do their thing. Very tactical fight so far, though. Playing tag with one another. Here come the Cavalry once again. They're going to try a frontal charge into the... Well, here comes the arrows going into the Boabarim, but perhaps using that as a smokescreen, they're going to try and charge into the Barrow Wights once again. That should be enough to do a pretty decent amount of damage here into the centre of the Barrow Wights. More damage than you would do under normal circumstances. But the problem here is, of course, they get bogged down in them for too long, and then they're just going to get smashed by the trolls. And yeah, that was, again, maybe a little bit impetuous from the Cavalry, and they're now fighting to the death. He would actually probably rather they just rout off and escape so they could potentially come back. That isn't going to happen this time, though. The Warlords of Umbar are coming in. They've got a better charge, but again, the Barrow Wights, the best thing that you can do with the Barrow Wights is bait the enemy into attacking them. And that, I think, is what has happened here so far. Here come the Snaga Stalkers, although the Snaga Stalkers are immediately wavering. Getting far behind enemy lines. They're not going to last too long on their own, however. The Warlords of Umbar should be able to escape here just because of their hit points, but they are shaken themselves. The Barrow Wights do cause fear, and the trolls nearby with their presence as well. Not good for the red team. The Warlords are going to try and charge into the trolls, I think, which is a much better target than the Barrow Wights. And that may have been what they were going for initially, but it was kind of gung-ho to try and do that while they were in the middle of the Barrow Wights. But you can see there, the Trolls of Angmar took a lot of losses. A lot of unit models fell there under the heavy charge from the Warlords of Umbar. And they're going to charge back in now. This is good work from Deathy to try and recoup the loss of the Cavalry. Of course, the Warlords of Umbar are getting showered with arrows themselves. And that wasn't as good a charge, to be honest with you. Only one of the trolls did fall there. And every time they turn their backs to the enemies. The Boabarim are now shooting in, and now that the trolls are weak, now may be the time for those archers to kill those trolls off. So definitely I would still say the blue team had the better of that little engagement, though, as the enemy continue to go back and forth with one another. Yeah, those archers actually, yeah, they are doing damage, to be fair. Now that the trolls are suitably softened up, the armor-piercing arrows doing their thing, hitting the Barrow Wight, so that's not really what they want. So far, though, I'd say the blue team have had the better of it, because The entirety of that Romena Caribbean unit is gone. Whereas they still have a couple of trolls at least. You know, it's not a huge presence, but they also killed off some of the Warlords of Umbar into the deal there as well, which, considering the amount that the red team have invested into their individual cavalry units, this is good for the red team. The Barrow Wights in particular, I think, have done a fantastic job of sort of drawing the enemy in to try and charge into them or shoot them, you know, doing exactly what they should as a tar pit, and then Angmar has been ready to take full advantage of that. And again, they're coming in for another bite at the Barrow Wights. The Pharaohs and Nobles coming in here. The Trolls once again. They surely can't keep falling for this. I mean, in this situation with the Trolls being as softened up as they are, it maybe isn't as big a problem. Here come the Snaga Archers that are out of ammunition. They're just going to try and drown them under a sea of fodder. A couple of the Pharaohs of Nobles getting caught up. I mean, the Pharaohs of Nobles there were quite fortunate, really, that they didn't have the same, because again, they did the same thing there. The Trolls, if they had been healthier, the Pharaohs of Nobles would have taken far more losses there, but the Barrow Wights coming forward as a screen, Warlords of Umbar getting forced ever further backwards. But I would say maybe at this point the Barrow Wights have gotten a little bit too far away from the main army. I can understand not wanting to commit forward stuff just yet, because there's still so many skirmishes up on this hill, which could do so much damage. Pharaohs and Nobles backing away from this fight wisely at this point. Romena Nardukadar coming in to engage with the enemy at this point, and the Barrow Wights, to be fair, they have taken damage acting as the target that they are up to this point in the battle. And their only support at this point is a very battered unit of Trolls. I think actually the Troll at this point is singular. And of course Snaga Archers, which is not exactly the last word in terms of quality. So yeah, you can see at this point Numenor starting to put a little bit more pressure on the enemy lines. Belagaya footmen coming into the Barrow Wights as well, although the Belagaya footmen are certainly not on the level of the Nardukadar, so they need to be a little bit more careful, I think. Umbar still very much playing the supporting role. Same thing with Mirkwood, really, as Angmar and Numenor continue to tear lumps out of one another. Barrow Wights on this side need a little bit more support, and they are going to get it in the shape of Snaga Stalkers. Again, maybe they were hoping for something a little bit more substantial. Romena Bawabarim may very well be out of ammunition, because they did fire several volleys into the enemy front line, and here we go. I mean, this could be it. Perhaps seeing that Bawabarim are starting to be committed to the front line, they feel as though the skirmishers are weakened enough that a more all-out offensive can begin from a blue team perspective, and they could be right here, because a lot of these reinforcements are a little bit too far away, and they're not going to be able to make it to the front line quickly enough. So they're going to have to hope that these initial lines are going to be able to hold up to this extreme scrutiny that they're obviously going to be put under. Halberds and pikes coming forward from Angmar. Line infantry coming forward from Mirkwood. Obviously some Guardians of Khan Doom as well, getting in behind the enemy lines, and they're going to be able to worry the back lines. They should be tidied up fairly easily, but again, it's another obstacle for all of these reinforcements to potentially have to go through, and those Romena Abarim are far away. Here come the Witchround Pikemen. I mean, here come the Seafarers of Nindamos, which, to be fair, they're going to absolutely tear through units like the Guardians of Khan Doom, but they definitely need to pick their targets. They're going to throw into the Witchround Pikemen there, doing a lot of damage once again. They are going to be able to tear vast cavernous holes through sections of the advancing blue team army, but is it going to be enough here? Umbar once again are a little bit too far behind, in my opinion. They still have to worry about that one unit of bows of Emondwir, but they need to get some of these Alcarondas Legion forward, I think, because at this point, you know, their Belagaya footmen that they committed forward was not up to the task of dealing with Barrow Wights, and even less so now that the rest of the Angmar and Mirkwood infantry is colliding with the line. So can the red team reinforce this line quickly enough, and can their skirmishers do the business? Because they still have Bawabarim. The Corsair crossbows, meanwhile, back here, getting absolutely shredded, it must be said, by the skirmishers, and with how much damage they've taken already, you can see that the Woodland Round Patrol are in position, doing the business, and again, shutting down one of the dangerous targets. I think it might actually be time for a bit of half speed with how quickly things are moving now. Warg Riders and Witchround Inquisitors worrying the flank, keeping the Pharazim Nobles off the front line. The Alcarondas Faithful are also over here, pikes, but these are resources. At this point, this cavalry is doing its job simply by keeping these away from the front line. So if it comes down to just pure infantry, I do believe with how the engagement started that the blue team should be able to win this. Warg Riders are retreating from the front line at this point. The Romena Abarim kind of trying to chase them down. Another one of the wargs, of course. Seafarers and Nindamos, but they need to shore up this front line here, Numenor, because they're in massive trouble. with the sheer numbers that Angmar brings to fight, including the Hammer Guard and reinforcements from Mirkwood Heavy Swordsmen. They are in danger here, I think, the red team, of being overrun. Like, the first line that they set up, a bit of miscommunication perhaps, because Umbar waited to come forward a little bit, but now that Umbar are coming forward, the tables could turn a little bit, because over here, I would say, the blue team are not looking quite as strong, and Umbar have got a lot of quality. Alcarondas Legion in force, Harbingers of Castamere, and a lot of these Mirkwood units are just the basic Amenduia forces, so they could be in a bit of trouble. The Elder Council actually breaking under the advance of the Alcarondas Legion and the flanking of the Belagaya Footman. The Sindar of the Girdle are still biding their time and waiting to come in. Of course, a very difficult unit of cavalry to deal with. Corsair crossbows on the hill. Balaketh marksmen still firing away. So yeah, over on this side, Umbar, they may have left Numenor in the lurch a little bit too long for my liking, but they could at least turn this battle around by collapsing in from the other side. Of course, in order for that to have any merit, Numenor needs to hold on this side, which is very much easier said than done, with the amount of force which is being levied at them. Halberds, pikes, warhammers, elven blades, Snaga, the most important part of the attack, of course. Nara and Irish Sentinels, I think they finally realised the fact that... Ooh, hello, that is a very interesting fight indeed. You can see here the Witchram Inquisitors. Defeat seems certain. Warg Riders wavering. I mean, I suppose the Alcarondas Faithful, they are really giving as good as they get in this fight, but I would also say the Witchram Inquisitors were already depleted when they went into that fight, I would assume, from archers of various descriptions, because if the Pharazim Nobles had been in melee with the Inquisitors, they would have taken losses. But yeah, the Alcarondas Faithful, especially with the Pharazim Nobles, so this is actually quite bad for Angmar. They will end up losing any sort of cav superiority they may have had. They still have some Warg Riders, which I think they're retreating to use defensively in the event that, the inevitable event, that cavalry fight goes the way of the red team. But also, the Naruna Irish Sentinels are finally coming to the front line. They have a morale boosting effect, which should make Numenor far less likely to rout, and also, of course, they're fantastic pikemen in their own right, which will prevent a lot of these polearm units from Angmar having it all their own way. Mirkwood also committing forward their Ents, however, in support of the Guardians of Khan Dûm, getting into the Remen of Bawabrim that are now out of ammunition, already shaken, of course. Still some arrows coming in. The Corsair crossbows are also firing away. I think it's about time we went back up to 1 speed, to be honest with you. Balaketh marksmen still firing away. Nara and Ira Guard, I think at this point they just have to come around here and start shooting into the infantry, and you can see actually over here, Sindar of the Girdle getting far too close to the action and actually getting sprayed down by arrows. An unnecessary loss there. And actually I think, yeah, the bows of Amenduia, this is the problem with the Mirkwood cavalry in this situation, is you kind of want to use them aggressively, but if you do, you know that the archers are just going to turn themselves on you and do that. But you may need to, just to take the pressure off the infantry here. Woodland Realm Patrol getting into melee, doing a good job though, as most elven archers tend to do, just because of their melee defense. And the Elves of the Elven King also using, I'm not sure if it's Silverthorn arrows, but I believe it is, just because they have sort of a thicker projectile, but it might not be, because to be fair, the Silverthorns that Lothlorien use have got like a sparkly effect on them. It might just be sort of a boosted arrow that the Elders of the Elven King have, but still very useful nonetheless. I don't know if it's armor piercing actually, it may be. Regardless, very strong unit of archers. Alcarondas Faithful getting into a position to potentially rear-charge at this point, and I mean, Numenor have reinforced this part of the line very, very nicely actually, and it's actually in the middle now, more so, where Angmar and Mirkwood are making the most gains. Umbar's advance has rather stalled in the face of all the Mirkwood skirmishers that have committed themselves to melee. Pharazim Nobles getting into the Woodland Realm Patrol, but immediately going to be charged in by wargs. Here you can see the Alcarondas Faithful also charging in. It's a shame at this point, I'm sure, for Umbar. They wish they had their warlords doing this instead, with their mighty charge. But this will do just fine, honestly, because over here, Numenor are now going to win with the support of that cavalry. And with both units of melee knights, the wargs wouldn't stand a chance if they got sandwiched between both, but losing micro a little bit there on the Alcarondas Faithful and taking a charge from the wargs there is the last thing Umbar really needed, but there's a lot going on here, so losing micro is very understandable. Guardians of Khan Dûm routing off the front line, so very back and forth here. The Ents have managed to get into the Corsair crossbows, and as I said, the crossbows, you know, I won't mention my opinion on the crossbows in this one, but crossbows have got a very nice shot, and their stopping power is very, very effective here, and you can see why. The Ents at this point are trying to shut them down, but even a unit of crossbows that did get massacred by arrows in this case was able to completely turn the fight around, I think, in the middle here. They're getting shot in the back here as well by Balaketh marksmen. Very back and forth here. The Elders of the Elven King are firing into the Nara and Aurora Guard, trying to do some heavy lifting. The Bows of Emondwyr. So yeah, this wing of Umbar that overextended itself has been dealt with, which will allow more Mirkwood forces and some Snaga as well to make their way to the front line. That, I believe, was Umbar's general. And yet more reinforcements. So again, it's sort of stabilised on the front line, but again, it's just Snaga that's standing in the way of the Umbar forces at this point, which is not really what Angmar and Mirkwood want. Wardens of Amon-Lank, which obviously have been firing for some time in this battle and are now in melee, with their axes and armour piercing, exactly the sort of thing you want to see against a unit of Romena, regardless of whether that's Bawabarim, Abadim or Nardugadar, and they're actually routing in the face of the elves here. The Nara and Ira Sentinels are actually just out of melee range for the most part, so they're not really being as effective as they could be. Elder Councillor over here, you can see here the Farazim Nobles are going to finally finish up what's left of the Wargs, and they need to, I think, because they need to start getting on with their rear charging. They've had the opportunities to do so, and if they don't, I mean, you know, you can see here that actually it's Mirkwood that are the ones getting into the back lines and doing more effective damage with their Sindar of the Girdle. Ents are also getting in here, systematically shutting down the skirmishers. The crossbows are gone at this point, and I'm not sure whether the red team have got anything to stop the Ents from running roughshod over their front line, but one thing I will say is the red team do still have a lot of strong infantry which are still doing the business on the front line, which they kind of need to hope that that's how they win this fight at this point, I think. Also at this point it might be worse. Well, the Elders of the Elven King are coming forward very quickly, as Elven archers are wont to do, and as soon as they get into melee they're taking point blank fire from the the Balaketh marksmen. They need to not stop right there, I must say. They're going to try and charge in. Their multiple HP is definitely saving them here, but as soon as they get into melee, of course, they're going to kill the Balaketh marksmen wholesale. The Bows of Emondwyr still have all their ammunition. They're actually firing away as well, shooting into individual targets. Balagai footmen. So yeah, you can see at this point the battle is getting rather stretched. A lot of routing there. A lot of routing from the blue team as well. Angmar Halberd and Blades of Emondwyr falling away. Here the Alth are also on the front line trying to hold back the tide, but it's not going to work here, and it could be a case that the Númenórean heavy infantry is what does the business here. Farazim Nobles killing off the Númenor general, and actually this is where the Farazim Nobles are at their very best. They have secured the cavalry advantage for their team. There's nothing really on the enemy team that would be able to stop them on horseback. Even the Sindar of the Girdle, I think, are far too depleted at this point, considering the arrows that have gone into them. But the Farazim Nobles, with their slightly enhanced ability to charge into infantry, this is exactly what you want to see if you're Númenor. Clad in their white capes, and they're really trying to do the business here on the Witchrealm Hammer Guard. They killed the general off after all, but they need to be careful, because if they stay in melee with the Hammer Guard for too long, they're going to be turned into paste inside their armour. Balagai footmen shuffling their way forwards. Heidi Peng as well. I don't know, I mean, the Ents are still a big factor as well. The Bows of Emondwyr are still going to be firing. There's still Snaga archers in the backfield, as well as several units of scattered skirmishers. But the fight has become very stretched here, and it may just come down to who's able to use their individual units the best. One problem I think that the red team are going to run into, the Elders of the Elven King and the Ents are still pretty healthy. And there's not really much they have in melee that could match them. I mean, they're going to win, I think, the frontline fight, but it's not as if they're going to be able to win it for free. They're going to have to really fight for it. Abadim and Alcarondas Legion on the front line. The Naranara Sentinels, I mean, pikes. And actually, they do have something which would be able to match the Elders of the Elven King. The Harbingers of Castamere are here. Here we can see the Wardens of Amon-Lank. The Elder Council are trying to use their javelins into the Naranara Sentinels and being very successful, actually. So another important little factor there. Harbingers of Castamere and Farazim Nobles getting a charge off into the Wardens of Amon-Lank and almost completely wiping them out, though. So all the gains that Mirkwood just made over here potentially wiped out, with another one of their important units being destroyed. Elder Council are going to be able to defeat Belagair archers, but I mean, they should be reinforced pretty soon. Sindar of the Girdle are still feasting on the Belagair archers, but I think the Sindar of the Girdle at this point may very well... I mean, to be fair though, I mean, 7 Sindar of the Girdle, 12 Farazim Nobles. The Sindar may be able to win that fight, especially seeing as both have seen battle extensively at this point, so neither one is going to have... Neither one is fresh, is what I'm saying. They've both been through the wars a little bit. This would be the ultimate test of just how much that Mirkwood skill comes into effect, and I don't think it's going to be enough. I think part of this is obviously going to be the fact that they're also getting support from the archers on foot, so a few extra stabs here and there. So yeah, the Sindar are going to lose that fight ultimately. A very, very competitive match as it unfolds here. Healy Peng, they're still trying to do their thing. The bows of Emondui with a lot of ammunition still left, and they don't really have anything to worry about anymore. So they're going to try and do as much damage as they possibly can. Strong point of the Balaketh marksmen are running off. Elders of the Elven King, Naru and Ira Royal Guard at this point are going to be finished off. They still have ammunition as well, because they did charge into melee first and foremost, and now they're going to be able to utilise their arrows. They may be armour-piercing arrows, I'm not sure. They have a unique effect though. They might be armour-piercing, I'm not sure if it's Silverthorn. They have the same projectiles as the God Halim Einar from Imladris as well. But it might be AP. Which should be interesting. Obviously just the one, so it's fine. And obviously very, very strong in melee as well. The bows of Amenduir need to be careful not to get caught in melee here. They need to continue to kite backwards, although part of the problem here is the Alcarondas Faithful are just in and amongst them, trying to stop them from firing. Yeah, they need to get out of here. The Goblin Tracker's also trying to fire in, so interestingly enough, while I think the red team were maybe a little bit more skirmisher reliant early on just because of their inferior numbers, in the late game here it's going to turn into the blue team needing to rely on their ranged units to win this, because in a pure melee capacity, based on the pikes and based on the heavy infantry they still have left, I think the red team would win. Another unit of Ravenna Baron, 70 of them in the late game as well, 22 Harbingers, all very, very good additions. Meanwhile, there is still this unit of Elder Council over here which is going to be victorious. At this point, every victory is going to be important, and you can see here the Ents. I would certainly, if I were the red team, I would try and group my forces up, because individual units can still be smashed into submission by the Ents, whereas if you have Harbingers and all that heavy infantry in a big cluster, the Ents would be less likely to do the damage they need to. The Snaga Archers getting into melee, immediately getting routed by the Black Numenorian infantry. Bows of Amenduir still firing away, Goblin Trackers doing the same. Naru and Ira Sentinels, though, heavy armour and those shields means that they're not helpless under arrow fire. Elders of the Elven King from behind, however, would still be able to do the business on them. Very much so, especially if it is AP, which is the effect they have. Again, I lose track of all the intricacies of Reforged sometimes with how deep the mechanics really can be. Meanwhile, Varazim Noble's still alive to an extent, and the Alcarondas Faithful, trying to go after the Elders of the Elven King, but at this point I don't think they have the numbers to charge into them and cause huge damage, and if they stay in melee with them they're just going to get shredded, so they may be better off just purely supporting their infantry. The problem with that, of course, is they will just end up getting shot by the Elders. Snaga Archers returning. Bows of Amenduir moving around to the back, I think. Yeah, the red team's getting a little bit separated and isolated, I think. The Ravenna Abarim are coming in here, but like I said, the Ravenna Abarim are out here on their own at this point. And this is going to allow Mirkwood to come in with their Ents, and with the support of the Elder Council this should be more than enough to mop up the Ravenna Abarim. Yeah, again, getting separated here in the late game. I think, to be honest with you, the blue team had the advantage going in here anyway. Like, fair play to the infantry, the Black Numenorians were doing their thing, but in the end I think the blue team just had too much going into this late game in terms of quality and in terms of unit type as well. Like, the red team were rather helpless at the hands of all the skirmishers, and after they had been depleted, I think, then the advantage in melee would have definitely flipped the other way. Yeah, these Ravenna Abarim getting isolated and killed. That the Cavalry is trying to help them out, but ultimately the Elder Council are spears in melee. There may only be 14 of them, but if they can land their blows on our Farazon as he comes charging back in, he should fall. Here comes one Warg as well. Getting a nice charge there, that one Warg. And the Ravenna Abarim at this point very much on the losing end of this fight, and the Alcarondas Legion, like, they're coming in but far too late. And that might be the difference maker in this fight, honestly. Like, Numenor and Umbar have just been a little bit separate. Umbar a little bit too far behind Numenor in what they want to do, which obviously, share the blame out equally there. Like, Numenor being a little bit too fast and not communicating what they want to do to Umbar. Umbar not noticing what Numenor is doing and not supporting them in time. Whereas I think Angmar and Mirkwood definitely stayed together. They definitely stayed united throughout the fight. And even when things were getting a little bit hairy in the middle there, and their infantry was starting to lose, you know, under crossbow and archer fire, and the heavy infantry of the Black Númenóreans really doing its thing. They kept calm, they pushed their Ents through the line to go after the crossbows. Even when their cavalry ended up losing, they managed to form up some pretty decent defences, and they managed to not crumble under rear charges from cavalry, which is always nice. It helps when, you know, you have morale buffing units nearby, otherwise I would have feared, especially for Angmar. But the Hammer Guard were able to fill that role nicely. Elves of the Elven King are reloading, and I think at this point that is just about that. Routing halberds. There are the Alcarondas faithful still trying to do their thing on Thranduil and his Elven King elders. But of course there's very much a shelf life on them. Meanwhile, the Harbingers came in here. Victory seemed certain, actually, and again, this is where all of the Umbar forces could have been, and if they had got here earlier to support the Remena Abarim, it could have been different, but I would have said I do still think the Remena Abarim should have come down here on their own in the first place, so I definitely can't pin that on Umbar. I'd pin that on Númenor. You can see the strength they could have brought to bear, because the Ents are all gone at this point, very, very quickly, under the force of all that Umbar infantry, especially the Harbingers that would have been down too. Because of course, trolls and Ents and units of that type do tend to struggle when they are put under extreme scrutiny from strong infantry units. Elders of the Elven King still reloading. Here come the bows of Emenduir. They still have ammunition as well, and that I think is going to be key. You know, just the fact that, well, Ar-Pharazôn, can he survive this? He does. He managed to get into melee. He took only a few arrows there because the archers weren't able to reposition themselves in time. Very nicely done. Hiladan. Yeah, the bows of Emenduir are going to be firing in. And this is the thing in the late game, when the elves still have ammunition, when the fight is down to its last few men, a 3% differential, you know that you're in trouble. There's one Barrow-wight actually here, standing among the conquered dead. And here you can see, again, like the Harbingers of Castamere, lagging a little bit further behind, and they needed to be the ones to meet the advance of the Elders of the Elven King head on, I think. Ar-Pharazôn is still alive, skewering that elf. There's actually one Abarim soldier left alive, holding Númenor's banner aloft. But of course, the problem here is, of course, the fact that the Elders of the Elven King are a very strong unit. The Harbingers of Castamere are strong as well, but they're more depleted. The bows of Emenduir are, I think, going to have to deal with Ar-Pharazôn first there. And, you know, bows of Emenduir, Ar-Pharazôn is far stronger in melee, but you'd still imagine the numbers. Like, can he really mulch his way through 25 of them? It is a rather magnificent gold Pope hat that he has on, but I don't think that's going to be enough here. There's also one bow lagging behind. Yeah, you can see here the Elders of the Elven King. They're simply too fresh. There are simply too many of them. Thranduil himself going to be able to mop up what's left of the Umbar forces here, but a very good showing, I think. A very, very close and competitive fight, this. Finally, Ar-Pharazôn is killed as well, which means, of course, the bows of Emenduir are going to be free to use what ammunition they have left, but I don't think that it's needed, to be honest with you. The Elders of the Elven King showing themselves to be incredibly strong in melee to finish off depleted but still high quality Umbar troops when all was said and done. They also took cavalry charges throughout this fight, so very, very nice indeed. And I think this is right, because I think, again, the slight disparate nature of what Númenor and Umbar did throughout the fight, I do feel as though Angmar and Mirkwood's teamwork was slightly better. Angmar, of course, they only have one Barrow-wight left alive in their army, and Mirkwood, they only have those two units as well, so only about 50 men left in their army. It says men remaining 307, but don't let that fool you. That's healed casualties. A very, very good fight, I would say. I think Lister, he did his job, to be fair. He may have got the lowest amount of kills on the field, but his army was always meant to blunt the advance, and he did that quite well, I would say. And Mirkwood obviously coming in with the damage, and Númenor doing a lot of damage as well in terms of kills, but of course, again, a lot of that was on Orcs, so that sort of inflates the kill count a bit. Good play all around, I think. I think, again, just the initial advance from Númenor, Umbar was slightly further behind. Again, even in the late game, Númenor charged in, Umbar slightly further behind, and for that reason, I mean, it's when a battle is this close, it's those fine margins by which the battle is won and lost ultimately. But good teamwork, I would say, all around, and just slightly better teamwork from Angmar and Mirkwood. Very well played to everyone involved. Let's see what did the damage for Lister. He may have got the lowest amount of kills, but the Hammer Guard proving themselves to be good on the front line. And initially it looked like Númenor was going to get overrun on that side of the front line, but they managed to salvage that situation very well. But even so, the Hammer Guard still took their toll. The Witch-Drum Inquisitors did not do very well, nor did the Warg Riders really, but that was sort of a cavalry-to-cavalry engagement, and considering the armour-piercing skirmishers that Numenor had in support, they did very well to shut down the Angmar cavalry, I think, Numenor. And that is to their credit. The Barrow Wights also did quite well on the front line. Of course, they get kills just by merit of staying in the fight for a long time, and they just sort of get kills by osmosis more than anything else. Everything else, though, relatively similar amount of kills from everything else. But the Trolls, most of those kills were on cavalry units, to be fair, before they ultimately got charged into the dirt by the Warlords of Umbar. But a very good fight, and it's good to see the North Downs again, because it is a very interesting map. There's a lot going on. And next, we'll probably go back to another siege again. I'm trying to get back into a sort of regular schedule again. It'll probably be one battle. I'm going to try for one battle every 3 days. We'll see how that goes. It's based on my schedule. It could go either way. It could be horrendous to try and keep up a relatively brisk schedule, or it could be doable based on what I know now. I definitely won't be able to do one battle every 2 days. I'm not even going to try and do that, because while I may be able to do it initially, eventually I'm just going to get completely burnt out doing that, and it will become hellish. But one battle every 3 days, I think, is probably doable, just because I will probably be able to record in bulk, and then throughout the rest of the week while I'm off, I can then leave it to render and leave it to upload and do that sort of thing then. So it's all about good planning, I think. But yeah, we'll see. The next battle, I think, though, will be another siege. Still in 0.97, we haven't actually had a repeat map as of yet, regardless of whether it's a new map or whether it was in the game previously. We'll see how long we can keep that run going. I don't think for too much longer, because I think I will make a return to either Rivendell or Dale soon, because I did get sent replays on them quite a long time ago, which are apparently very good. I think Dale in particular, because it was a new map to 0.97, I think we can justify revisiting that quite soon. Rivendell, though, I've shown an awful lot, so maybe I will hold off on that. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.